All right, guys. So there was just a study that was published in the Journal of Diabetes, Obesity, and Metabolism, which is a prestigious journal, and this was just published or made public about a week ago. And the results are super impressive, but not overly surprising, because for those in the know, we have been preaching for a long time for these folks with cardiometabolic concerns, primarily in our pre-diabetic and diabetic populations, that reducing total carbohydrate intake, driving up total protein intake, and then going through periods of caloric deficit, meaning you're eating less than what you're expending, yield a ton of benefits. So primarily in this population, we want these folks to maintain, or even better, to build lean muscle mass while they're going through a deficit to lose body fat. This is incredibly important for so many reasons. You are going to increase your insulin sensitivity, so driving down insulin resistance, which across the board then should help you have better glucose management or metabolism, lower your hemoglobin A1C, which is one of the key blood markers that we look at for indication of how severe your insulin resistance is or poor glucose metabolism. By improving all these metrics, you're going to be reducing your risk factors for things like heart disease and stroke, Alzheimer's, dementia, so on and so forth. So we've been preaching this a lot in the realm of nutrition and fitness, and this is just another study that drives home the importance of this message that many of us have been screaming from the rooftops for years now. So, like I said, this study was just published. You can kind of see a little snapshot here on the 17th of October, so still pretty new. So I'm going to pull up this PDF here, and we're going to go over some of the key data that really just stands out to me. So if you want to find this study, it is right here for you. So that title, again, is Low Calorie, High Protein Diets, Regardless of Protein Source, Improve Glucose Metabolism and Cardiometabolic Profiles in Subjects with Prediabetes or Type 2 Diabetes and Overweight or Obesity. Now, I know that's a mouthful. So this was broken up over 6-month period, okay? And the participants were given a 30% calorie restriction from what their baseline intake is. So depending on the individual, this might have been a pretty drastic calorie deficit, or it might not have been much of all. Considering that in America, most folks are drastically over-consuming their calories, and most of it by way of food that we inherently know is not good for us, like your SAD diet, the standard American diet, typically includes highly processed, ultra-refined foods that are laden in all kinds of terrible carbohydrates for you. Kind of think about your typical American foods that are in a box or a bag, sit on the shelf, don't expire, and are designed for us to overconsume, right? That is the standard American diet. You know, it's like 73% of people are obese or overweight now. So for folks to be in this category, they had to have been pre-diabetic or type 2 diabetic with zero medication outside of metformin. And if they were on metformin, they had to have had a stable dose for the last 6 months. So overall, I'm really impressed with this study. I even like that they admit some important factors are to consider in quote unquote real world consideration, and not just looking at the lab practicality of this. So this was a two split groups, right, in this randomized controlled trial group. So group A mostly had a diet high in animal protein, and group B mostly had their diet high in plant-based protein. Everything else was designed to be the same. So total macronutrient profile was broken down in 35% total calories coming from protein, 35% total calories coming from carbohydrate, and that last 30% coming by way of fat. So just going to go over some of the notes here on the screen with you. So this is just from the quick abstract, right? Some things to go over. So again, there were 117 participants. All of them had to be over 18 years old. This high protein, low calorie diet, as I just said, was 35% total from calories. Again, they were hoping in that protein content that for each of the divided groups, 75% of that total protein would either be from an animal source or a plant source, okay? And then again, both diets were 30% fat and 35% carbohydrates, and the intervention lasted 6 months. So this is your first examination of the data at the 3-month mark, and then again at the end for the 6-month mark. So some key considerations to make in terms of diabetes, cardiometabolic health, and just general wellness is when a person is overweight or obese, one of the very first things that we are going to promote as good healthcare practitioners is we need folks to lose unfunctional body mass, aka body fat. Okay, if you can lose upwards to 10 to 15% of total body mass, ideally that way coming from body fat, Across the board, your health markers improve without question. Okay, your blood pressure improves, your glucose metabolism improves, your cholesterol improves. We know all of this stuff. So in this study, all of this is again highlighted. So it's just another reason why I like it, but it's so recent, I had to go over it. So total body weight in the group that consumed mostly animal protein in this high protein, low calorie diet. Okay, at the 3-month mark, they lost an average of 6 kilograms. By the 6-month mark, they had lost an average of 8 kilograms. So we're talking a little over 16 pounds lost in 6 months. That's pretty impressive, okay? And then if you look at the high plant-based protein diet, these guys lost pretty much the same amount of weight. At that the 3-month mark, they lost an average of 6 kilograms. So like zero difference between the animal protein. And then when you slide over to the 6-month, it's 7.7 kilograms. So still right around that 8 kilogram mark. So both groups experienced an incredibly successful overall weight loss. But let's take this a bit further down and look at total fat mass. So participants in this high protein animal group lost about 2.7% of total body fat by 3 months and a little over 3% by the 6-month mark. Again, relatively same on the plant-based protein. Month 3, they lost 2% body fat, and by the 6-month mark, they're pushing into the 3% category, right at 2.85%. So across the board, again, pretty similar success. Then we get down to the abdominal visceral fat. So this is your belly fat. This is that spare tire, the jiggly by your belly button. This is the stuff that kills you, okay? Body mass that is distributed throughout, that's body fat, is actually much safer for you than the stuff that is around your belly. This is especially true for men, okay? So at the 3-month mark, these folks lost just 0.3 kilograms of abdominal visceral fat and 0.4 at the 6-month mark. And then for the plant-based protein, again, pretty similar at 0.3 kilograms for the first 3 months. And then by the end of the 6 months, it moved up to 0.47 kilograms. So they're losing belly fat, which is what we want to see happen. Now, when we're going through a deficit, one of the primary reasons we preach from the rooftops, hey, you have to drive your protein intake up, is because we're trying to protect your lean muscle mass. So lean muscle mass is responsible for about 88% of all postprandial glucose metabolism. Postprandial meaning after your meal. So your glucose management after mealtime or snack time. Not to mention that muscle is our organ of longevity, right? It's what helps us stay strong. It helps us stay mobile. It protects our joints. It protects our skeletal system. It allows us to be able to move and to function as we move into advanced age. And of course, all the aspects of like sport and performance and such. So long story short, when we're promoting a calorie deficit, we want to protect that lean muscle mass. We want to minimize as much of it as we can. But nonetheless, if you are in a caloric deficit, we generally anticipate that you're going to experience some decrement in total lean muscle mass. We just want to make it as small as possible. Now, in this study, at the 6-month mark for the folks consuming high animal protein, okay, they lost 1.6 kilograms of lean muscle mass. So, right around 3 pounds. And pretty much the same for the plant-based protein, albeit they lost slightly more, 1.73 kilograms at the 6-month mark. But that's not all. Let's also look at these waist circumference. So waist circumference is also one of these things that we know is an inherent on the paper risk factor for things, again, diabetes, heart disease, stroke, Alzheimer's, all of these comorbidities or lifestyle related diseases that, hey, by the way, are the leading cause of death in this country and in the world. So waist circumference dropped by 6.5 centimeters after 6 months in the high animal protein group, and it dropped also 6.5 centimeters in the high plant protein group. So across the board, everyone's winning here. Now let's talk about the blood pressure. At the end of the 6 months for the animal protein group, their blood pressure dropped 8.45 millimeters per mercury, or just think of those numbers. It dropped 8.5 points. And then also for the plant-based protein, they didn't have quite as much success, but they still had success at 3.58 millimeters per mercury, or those points on your diastolic blood pressure. And then for the systolic blood pressure, we see improvements again, pretty much in the same neighborhood. For the animal protein folks, they lost 11.5 points. And then for the plant-based protein, they lost 9.5 points. So what this is highlighting to us is the protein matters, the calorie deficit matters. And when those things are focused on and controlled, you can and will have success if you're holding yourself accountable. So here are some other things that I appreciate that they talk about in this study. And I'm going to just read for you verbatim. Fat and carbohydrate intakes differed significantly between the groups, with subjects in the high protein animal group reporting greater fat consumption, whereas higher carbohydrate intake was reported by those participants following the high plant protein diet. So this kind of goes without saying, right? If you're getting more of your protein through animals, it's expected that you're going to have a higher fat intake because these sources of protein do just generally have more fat in them. And vice versa for the plant-based proteins. If you're eating mostly plants, you're inherently going to eat more carbohydrate, which they do a great job explaining. This is related to the different types of high protein foods recommended for each group. The high protein animal diet involved foods like meat, oily fish, and eggs, which have somewhat higher fat content. Whereas the high plant protein diet included foods like oats, nuts, and legumes, which generally have higher carbohydrate content. So there was no significant changes in physical activity or sleep habits between the two groups, and I like this part right here. It is important to highlight that no specific exercise recommendations were made. The participants were simply advised to increase their daily physical activity from their baseline. So this is a point I'm going to spend some time to discuss. So they just wore a basic wrist fitness tracker, right? I can't remember what the name of it was off the top of my head, but essentially they're tracking movement every 10 seconds. And they just told these folks, hey, we need you to go increase your movement on your everyday life. Okay, roger that, sir. Great. I can move my feet more, whatever it is. So the point being is we don't know if these people were strength training, if they were walking, if they were swimming, going for a run. All we know is that they increased their movement from baseline. So for some, that could have been just walking an extra couple hundred feet. That could have been going to the gym an extra day a week. We don't get that data. But what I would tell us listening to think about, the folks around us, is if you are strength training, you can further mitigate this decrement or loss of lean muscle mass, right? Because then not only are we in a deficit and burning extra energy, but we are also stimulating our body for growth. And if you're eating this much protein, then there is no reason why we can't be driving mTOR and driving muscle protein synthesis for us to be in a more anabolic state, despite being in a catabolic state due to this deficit, okay? So that is just a very important distinction that we need to be paying attention to. So here's some more data. I mean, I might as well highlight the whole dang freaking chart, but we're going to focus on these first several lines here. Okay, so all of these blood markers were taken after a 12-hour fasting period. And this is the part where it gets juicy because these numbers are what we're looking at for total wellness. We're talking long-term health. Are you reducing your risk to have a heart attack? Are you reducing your risk of having a stroke? How are your blood markers improved? Because when we make dietary, lifestyle, fitness changes, sure, the way that you look in the mirror, the way your clothes are fitting, your energy levels, these things are all highly important because that's what helps us stay motivated, right? If we're feeling better, we look better, we're moving better, fantastic. That drives our motivation. But to really track your success, we also not only need to be tracking numbers on a scale or from a DEXA scan or a bod pod in terms of total lean mass and body fat, but we should also be looking at our blood markers because this is the internal look to really judge and verify if you are having success. Because if you're losing weight, but your glucose metabolism is getting worse, or your cholesterol is increasing, or your insulin sensitivity is tanking, then that means whatever you're doing is not going to last or be sustainable for the long term. But on the other hand, if all of these things are also improving, it means what you're doing is working, and we have to drive home that message. So let's take a look here. Fasting glucose at the end of the 6-month period for the animal protein folks dropped by 10 points, okay? That's a huge drop. That means you could go from 120 to 110 or 100 to 90, okay? And in terms of glucose changes, that's pretty significant. Pretty much the same for the protein animal group, or the plant protein animal group, sorry. So 9.5 points. Now let's look at insulin fasting insulin, right? Dropped nearly 5 points for the animal protein group and almost 4.5 points for the plant protein group. Again, significant metabolic improvements showing that your body is better responding to insulin and better managing glucose. This is specifically important in the context for these pre-diabetic and diabetic folks. Absolutely impressive. Hemoglobin A1C dropped 0.2% for both groups, almost 0.3 for the plant protein groups, which is great. Okay, triglycerides, total blood fat dropped 13 points for the animal protein group. So think about that. You're eating more fat, but your total blood fat still dropped. It's because your body becomes more efficient at handling these nutrients when they're coming from whole food sources. Again, for the plant protein group, it nearly doubled that, dropped 24 points. Absolutely impressive. Total cholesterol for the animal protein group dropped 2.73 points. Initially at the 3-month mark, it dropped 8 and then really balanced out at 2.7. And for the plant protein group, started at 15 and then kind of balanced out at 13.8. Again, massive changes in total cholesterol. LDL cholesterol, the bad cholesterol that people like to harp on so much. Okay, at the end of the 6 months, we're looking at a drop of 3.55. And then again, for the plant-based protein, we're looking at a total drop of 15 points. Again, you know me, I'm not a vegan advocate, but I do very much promote a whole food, highly plant-focused diet, right? We need good proteins, but we also need plants, and this speaks to that. Let's talk about HDL, or the heart protective cholesterol. Improved by 2.5 points for our our animal-based folks. Man, I keep jacking this up. And marginally improved for the plant-based protein folks by 0.42. Now, the apolipoprotein A, so this is the protein that is associated, right, with HDL. This is the good stuff. It improved by 0.17 in the animal plant and went down in the plant protein, animal protein, plant protein. Man, talk about getting tongue-tied over here. Apolipoprotein B, so the stuff associated with LDL, or quote unquote the bad cholesterol, also, I didn't highlight this, went down 3.85 points for the animal protein group and went down 7.18 points for the plant protein group. So when we talk about overall risk factors, essentially across the board, everything improved. Okay, we've lost weight, our cholesterol's improved, our glucose metabolism has improved, our insulin sensitivity has now improved. So we found that fat-free mass of participants following the high protein animal diet decreased by 2.6 to 3.9%. That's the fluctuation. Whereas that of the participants with the high plant protein diet decreased pretty much by the same, 2.43% plus or minus 5.28%. Fat mass had decreased by 10%. Guys, 10% weight loss. Directed fat mass loss in both groups by the end of the study, showing that most of the weight loss was due to loss of adipose tissue, meaning the significant weight change that they experienced was primarily all fat mass, which is exactly what we want to see. So freaking cool. We'll slide down to this other couple of pieces here. Our findings reveal that the consumption of a low-calorie, high-protein diet can lead to a significant reduction in total fat mass and visceral fat by, again, keyword here, preserving lean mass to a large extent, independent of protein source. Beyond protein quantity or source, this evidence suggests that protein quality plays a crucial role in preserving fat-free mass in people with prediabetes or type 2 diabetes consuming a low-calorie diet. Let's pause there. What does that mean? This means you can't just go grab protein bars and eat your freaking soybeans or whatever weird protein supplements on the market. We have to maximize high quality protein. Not that there's anything wrong with soybeans. I was more referring to like the highly processed crappy foods that are on the market. Okay, soy protein's fine. But again, protein source, protein quality does matter. And again, remember, these folks weren't structured through any kind of actual resistance training. I would bet had they gone through a structured physical resistance training program, that their lean mass might have actually even increased and they would have had more total body fat loss. So let's read these next couple of parts here. It has been hypothesized that the consumption of large quantities of protein could lead to mTOR hyperactivity and increased insulin resistance in the mid or long term. Okay, this is a conversation that I have with providers all the time. Oh, we can't have these people eating high protein. They're going to increase their insulin and they're going to have worse glucose management. It's totally not true, and the study totally debunks that. Our results contraindicate this hypothesis and demonstrate that insulin resistance improved in people with prediabetes and type 2 diabetes following a hypocaloric high protein diet, meaning they're in a calorie deficit primarily focused on getting protein through calories through protein. In addition, we did not note any worsening of renal function because, again, we hear all the time, can't eat too much protein, it'll hurt your kidneys. We know that that is not real. Unless you have prior kidney issues, then that's a different conversation. Further, microalbuminuria decreased in both diet groups and effect that is associated with better renal function and more morbid mortality in type 2 diabetes. So the renal function actually improved is what they're saying here, okay? Although our dietary interventions included 35% of total calories from protein, participants in both groups reported a lower intake of this macronutrient. This finding is common in real-world trials involving high-protein diet prescriptions that are based on typically consumed foods and do not include supplements. I'll come back to that. The dietary habits reported by the participants suggest that they found it difficult to adhere to a low-calorie diet with 35% of total calorie volume from protein without using protein supplements. Despite the lower protein intake observed in our study than what they wanted, the benefits to body composition and cardiometabolic health outcomes were similar to those reported in other studies involving higher protein consumption. So this is a real thing that I deal with every day with clients and patients, right? Number one thing I get is I hate to use the word complaint, but maybe the number one obstacle I hear from people is I'm having a very hard time hitting my protein target. And this is primarily coming from folks that don't want to rely on supplements, something like a whey protein isolate. So I'm not sure what the thought process was in this study, but I will always encourage you, my clients and patients, to lean into a whey protein isolate. I do not want you to rely on a whey protein isolate. I want you to utilize it as it is intended, a supplement. If you're trying to eat 185 grams of protein a day, 200 grams of protein a day, or maybe you're a smaller person and you're only shooting more for 150, it can be a difficult number to reach, especially if you're not accustomed to eating whole foods. So we have to think about these foods and where can we get the most protein, right? We know eggs are a fantastic source of protein, roughly 6 grams per egg. But with that also comes some fat that we need to be mindful of if we're going to maintain a calorie deficit. Of course, things like chicken breast, a sirloin, fish, beef, across the board, right? We have all these animal sources, but once we start getting down to the nitty gritty, you can really only carry so much food in your stomach before you start feeling a little gross from overeating. And then we can kind of shift to what are some other easy to eat high protein foods? Some of my favorite things to work in are things like non-fat Greek yogurts and low-fat cottage cheese, right? They are very high in protein, pretty low in total fat content, and for the little bit of volume that you eat, you can get quite a bit of protein from it. And then we can start looking at, can you use a hard-boiled eggs as a snack, maybe a beef jerky? If you're someone that eats some bread, choosing to go for a whole grain bread that will offer some marginally higher protein for what the product is. But at this point in time is when we say, hey, where can we fit in a protein shake? Right? Again, I'm biased to whey protein isolate for many reasons, but at the end of the day, it's the highest protein concentration per gram and carries the most amount of an amino acid called leucine, which is most responsible for the anabolic growth that we experience when we're training and what we're trying to get from muscle protein synthesis. So a whey protein isolate is really the most bang for your buck. Most of these supplements on the market have between 25 and 30 grams of protein per shake. So that is pretty much the equivalent to what most normal people are eating at a meal from, 4 to 5 ounces of a chicken or steak, maybe a little bit less, but still it's like right there on the mark. So if you're struggling to hit this target, it becomes a very easy way to say, hey, I'm maximizing total protein intake by taking this protein shake. And by proxy, considering you don't have a milk protein allergy or dairy allergy, you don't get super full. You can keep moving. You don't get lethargic. You can eat a piece of fruit with it for all I care. Okay, so I believe that was my last note here. Yeah. So again, as we end off, I have to just reiterate again the importance that if you are someone that has some health concerns, if you have excess belly fat, if you're experiencing signs of insulin resistance, which are related to things like chronic migraines, erectile dysfunction, PCOS, if you're pre-diabetic, type 2 diabetic, and you really want to see some substantial change, you do not want to be on medication for the rest of your life, things like statins or metformin or insulin. If you are trying to prevent these things from happening, Or forget all that stuff. Maybe you're just a bit overweight and you're like, I gotta make some changes. The number one thing you can do is obviously first we got to make sure you're sleeping good. But sometimes we can't sleep good if we're that overweight. So then we turn to nutrition and we turn to training. And my job here is to help you figure out to bridge the gap between those two things. And so bridging that gap on the nutrition side says, hey, we're going to lower total carbohydrate intake. We're going to drive up total quality protein, and then we're going to try to keep fat stable. And then on the other side of that, just like in the study, we're going to get your body moving more. I'm a huge fan of getting up and going for a fasted walk in the morning, but wherever you're going to get your activity, that's all I care about. I don't care if you're going to a kickboxing class. I don't care if you're going to go for a walk or a jog. Increase your output. As I've mentioned several times in this video, I think you get the most bang for your buck when you can invest some time in resistance training. The data on that is also very clear. Across the board, it'll improve your insulin sensitivity. It'll promote lean muscle mass. Oh, and hey, by the way, when you increase your lean muscle mass, of course, you might look a little better. You might be a little bit stronger, but it also means that your resting energy demand, your resting metabolic rate also goes up. And at the end of the day, when that number goes up, guess what you get to do? You get to eat more food. And I don't know about you guys, but I enjoy food. I am a foodie. And if I can do anything to allow myself to eat more food and to be able to have a little bit more autonomy to have the quote unquote naughty foods occasionally without worrying about the detrimental effects, because I've been training, I've been sleeping, I'm eating 95% good all the time. And the once in a while I decide to have a scoop of ice cream or a piece of pizza, I don't feel as bad about it because I've been building this lean muscle mass. I've been training. I know that it's not the best thing for me, but I also know I'm going to get right back on the horse and keep it moving. And that little bit of enjoyment that comes from the food, the mouth pleasure, the emotional satisfaction are so beneficial, but only when we're making sure to do all the other things right so that we can enjoy those foods without the consequences. So if you've liked this video, you want to learn more, if you're interested in getting your own custom meal plan, custom coaching, guys, this is what I do. I walk you through this whole process in a 12-week personalized program. We sit down, we talk about your goals, we talk about your food preferences, we talk about your schedule, we sit down and take a deep dive through all this stuff. We will make blood work recommendations, and then what we do on my end is we start sitting down and putting together a custom meal plan for you. We put together breakfast recipes, lunch recipes, dinner recipes, even some snacks if your calories and your schedule and everything else call for it. You get a custom recipe list so you know exactly what you're making and how to make it. You get a grocery list to complement that, so when you get to the grocery store, you're not beat bopping around looking through a list. You know exactly what to go, where to go, how to get there, right? And then the other piece to this puzzle is you also get a personalized training program. So we say, hey, here's what we need you to eat. Here's some activity to start doing, and here are the directions on how to execute. It is a literal blueprint to becoming a stronger, healthier version of you. So if you're ready, send us a message, hit the website, do whatever you got to do to get a hold of us. I'll happily discuss these things with you, and I can't wait to help you in the future. If you've made it this far, much love, take care.